Hey everybody, today I want to talk to you about MorphSVGPlugin's pathDataToBezier method. This method makes it possible to have an SVG path define the path an object will follow when creating tweens using the Bezier plugin. In other words, we can now draw whatever squiggly artwork we want in Illustrator or Sketch and create a tween that's going to make an object follow that path. Really quick, I want to go over my SVG here. I want to point out that we have this path with an ID of motion path. That's going to be the green squiggly line. And then next we have an SVG group with an ID of balloon. And here's all the information used to render that balloon and the rectangle around it. We also have a group here called guides, but I'll reveal what that does later on. Moving over to our JavaScript panel, I just have some very basic code in place. We're going to start off by always clearing our console, declaring a tween variable, which I'll use for my animation. Opacity is a variable that I'll use to toggle the opacity of some elements on and off. Most importantly, motion path is going to be the Bezier data that we feed into our Bezier tween, and we'll do some stuff when I click on a button. So most importantly, starting out, what I want to do is grab the path data from this SVG path right here and convert it to a Bezier. So to do that, we're going to call on MorphSVGPlugin's pathDataToBezier method. Now this method needs a parameter which is going to tell it which path to grab and convert to Bezier data. And in this case, we're just going to pass in the ID of the path that we're using, and it's called motion path in my SVG. You could also pass in a reference to that DOM element here as well. So once we've created our motion path, let's take a look at what it actually is. So I'm going to do a console.log motion path. We're going to save this. We're going to hit run. And then I'm going to open up my console using Command Option J. And you'll see that we have an array with 19 objects. I'm going to crack open that array, and each object that we have is a point or anchor point along our cubic Bezier path. And so you'll see that each of these are an object with X and Y coordinates, all right? Now, I want to point out that the first object that we have here has an X of 101 and a Y of 391, okay? So that's basically going to be the first point in our path. So closing the console, we're going to be somewhere around 100 pixels over here and 391 down to give us this first point in our path. Now what I'm going to do is use that path when I create a Bezier tween. So what I'm going to do is just paste in some code that's all ready to go. All right, we're going to say we're going to create a new tween-like tween. The target of that tween is going to be the balloon. It'll be 2 seconds long, and we're going to be using the Bezier plugin. So the Bezier plugin takes an object, which is going to take our values, and so the values for this tween are going to be all the cubic Bezier data, or all those points that we have inside of our motion path. And it's imperative that the type is set to cubic, okay, because we're using cubic Bezier data. And we have an onUpdate callback in here, which is going to allow us to have our jQuery UI slider be updated. So let's run this code and see what happens. Take note of the fact that before I hit the Create Animation button, which creates my tween, that the balloon is naturally sitting right here. Okay, when I hit Create Animation, you'll see, wow, the balloon follows a motion-y curve. Well, you may be saying, hey, I thought the balloon was going to follow the actual path that I drew. Well, let's run it one more time. I'll scrub backwards, and you'll see where the balloon actually ends up. Now, the reason for this odd sort of positioning is because when we're grabbing our points from this curvy green line, those are all absolute values. And what I'm going to do is just rerun this pen, start it out, okay, and I'm going to click here to activate my magic guides, okay? All I did was set the opacity to 1 of these yellow squares, which are roughly 100 by 100 pixels wide and tall. And this illustrates the fact that the top point in this path is basically offset by 100 pixels, okay? So the X and Y of this point of the path is 100 by 100. And I'm also drawing the same 100 by 100 square relative to the top left corner of the balloon. Now when I hit Create Animation, you will see that the entire offset of the path that the balloon is using is 100 by 100 pixels. And it's important to note that when we're doing the motion of the balloon, we're using X and Y transforms, okay? So if the balloon starts with its top left-hand corner up here, and we say transform X 100, that value is going to be relative to its top left-hand corner, okay? X of 100, Y of 100 is not going to be an absolute value up here. Remember, whenever we apply transforms, it's relative to its untransformed position. So transforming along the x-axis by 100 pixels would move you over here, and then down 100 along the Y. So now that we see how that works, we're going to show you how to actually get that balloon closer to that green line. And there's a few ways you can do it. The first way is that we can pass a configuration object into the pathDataToBezier method, and some of the properties that we can do are an offset x and an offset y. So I'm going to say offset x is going to be minus 100, and the offset y is also going to be minus 100. I'm going to run this animation one more time. I'm going to open up my console, and I just want to show you that now the array of points that we're creating is going to be a little bit different. Remember that the first object in this array, I believe, was an x of 100 and a y of 391. But what I've done is I've subtracted now 100 from each of those values. So we now have literally offset the position of all those points in that path, which means that when we run our animation, it's going to be moved over to the left a little bit. And actually, if I put on my guides, since we're subtracting 100 and 100 along the x and y, the balloon actually ends up exactly where it was initially in my SVG. So using the offset x and y, you could sort of guess at some numbers. I could say, let's offset by negative 150, and the y maybe go up, a little bit more, something like that. And then when you run, you could create animation, and you'll see, all right, I'm getting closer to the path. But at GreenSock, we understand your needs as a developer, and you don't want to be playing this guessing game. So instead of setting the offset x and offset y, which are useful at times, we have a better solution for you, okay? We're going to pass in an align property this time, and we're going to just say, hey, use the balloon. And what this means is that it's going to adjust all of the Bezier points so that the balloon automatically touches the line. So without any further ado, we're going to hit create animation, and now check it out. The top left-hand corner of the balloon perfectly stays absolutely glued to that line. Now, I know what you're saying. You want to have the balloon centered around the line. Well, the easiest way to do that without any guessing is just to use a tween light set, which will take the balloon and use x% and y% to offset it based on half its height and half its width along the x and y axis. So now when we run, and I say create animation, you have it the center of the balloon perfectly following the line. So we don't have to do any math or do any guesswork. Everything is just dandy. So we've seen how to move the balloon to the path. Well, what if you want to move the path to the balloon? What we're going to do for this is use the keyword relative as the align value. I'm going to hit run, and then watch when I create animation that the balloon just moves up from where it is. It literally moved the path relative to the balloon. For this demo here, I've made my balloon draggable, so I can place the balloon anywhere I want, and whenever I hit create animation, the balloon just naturally floats up from where it is, because it's moving the path relative to the balloon. The way that works is like so. I'm going to open up my console, and let's inspect now the values in this array. You'll see that the first value in the array is plus equals 0 for the y. And all of the values use this relative notation that GSAP uses. So it's always plus equals 10 from the normal position, okay? So that means we can put the balloon wherever we want, and the path moves relative to the balloon. And in case you're wondering how I made this balloon draggable, I used some super secret code that creates a draggable instance out of the balloon, okay? You can learn more about GreenSock's draggable tool at greensock.com/draggable. And another cool thing you can do is you can actually rotate, scale, and transform the path however you like. In order to do that, we'll get rid of the align property that we have here, and I'll show you how we can pass in a matrix that contains an array of values for a 2D matrix. So I'm just going to run. We'll hit create animation, and you'll see that those values rotated the path and moved it. Alright, so advanced users might have a lot of fun with that. Up until this point, all of the demos have been using an SVG path and an SVG element to follow that path. Well, you don't need to have elements inside of the same SVG that has the path, and nor do your elements need to be SVG elements that follow the path. In this little demo here, I have just a few numbers inside of divs, all right? So we have 4 divs, and then I have an SVG that contains my path, all right? Over in my JavaScript code, I'm creating a timeline light instance, and I'm creating a guide using the same syntax that we used earlier, saying, hey, you know what? Grab my motion guide from the SVG. We're going to do align relative, which means that each number is going to animate as if it has its own path relative to its x and y position. So we're going to do a very quick stagger from of each number, and that's going to result in this animation right here, where all of the numbers stagger from the beginning of this path, and all the paths end relative to where they are within the DOM. Now, you don't even need to have the SVG technically in the flow of your document. So I can go to my CSS panel, and I can take my SVG and just say display none. So really all we're doing is using the coordinates of this path in this SVG. We don't need to see the path, it doesn't need to be shown. So I'm going to hit run, and then you'll just see same thing happens. Each number is going to still follow that path when the Bezier tween is created. And to take things one step further, the object that you're animating doesn't even need to be a DOM element. In this demo created by Blake, our forums moderator extraordinaire, you'll notice that there's an SVG element here with a path, but beneath that, all the rendering is happening to the canvas, all right? He's using Pixie for super high-speed WebGL 2D rendering, but you'll notice that he is creating a Bezier object using MorphSVGPlugin pathDataToBezier to grab that SVG path, and he's just creating a very simple tween max tween and passing in those values. So very flexible what you can do with this method. To illustrate how to get the objects to rotate in the direction of the path, I've turned this SVG back on so you can actually see it. Now, auto rotate is a property of the Bezier plugin. So what I'm going to do is, after specifying the type, I'm just going to say auto rotate true. I'm going to hit run, and this works pretty cool. All right, keep an eye on those numbers. You'll see that the one sort of, dips down, then faces up, then dips down, and all those numbers are going to rotate just perfectly. It's really cool. Now, what I want to do is show you a little bit of a gotcha. This works really well because these lines start out basically with a rotation of 0. Okay, it's a very flat line. There's no angle really at the beginning of this line here. But if we go over to our other demo we've been using with the balloon, I've changed it so that we're just aligning the balloon to the path. So we have an animation like this, and the top left edge is locked to that path. All right. Now this is a very steep angle, if you will, and watch what happens. I'm going to put the same auto rotate true on here. I'm going to hit run, and I'm going to hit create animation, and whoa, that may not look exactly like what you want to see, but what's happening is it's actually working absolutely right. It's just that we're taking into account that when the balloon is standing upright, it has a rotation of 0. But to follow this very steep angle, it literally has to rotate about 270 degrees, and that's what you're seeing here. So we can adjust the auto rotate property by putting an offset value in of 90. And what that's going to do is just imagine if we took it from this position right here and offset it by 90 degrees. We'll hit run, and you'll see now when I create the animation that it is perfectly following the curvature of the path. We just had to sort of account for the fact that this path starts going up and the other paths start going, horizontally, and there was no rotation at the beginning, okay? So what's happening is, again, the balloon had to account for the path that there's a very severe rotation. It had to change sort of its orientation. So we just offset that with the auto rotate value there. If you want to learn more about the Bezier plugin, please go into the Bezier plugin docs, and it'll show you how the auto rotate works and how you can actually pass in an array of values for the position properties, the rotational values. So maybe your rotation is something other than rotation. Maybe it's rotate. Again, that's all explained in the documentation. So hopefully you folks have some fun with this new method, and if you have any questions, swing by our forums. We'd love to help you.